Greetings. I'm Dr. Kurt Johnson of Light on Light Publications, and we're here to celebrate for the International Children's Month the two magical books whose covers you've just seen. First, One Brightness by children's book author Victoria Friedman and renowned cosmologist Dr. Jude Currivan. And then Fogbusters with Victoria and iconic author and systems scholar Dr. Rian Eisler. We've had many opportunities to talk about these wonderful books, but to share here, we've chosen their discussions from humanities team's inspiring Global Oneness Summit. So let's begin with Victoria Friedman and Dr. Jude Currivan sharing about One Brightness, The Eyes of Love.
This is a section highlighting a book by Jude Currivan, inspired by Jude Currivan and myself, Victoria. And I want to tell you how this happened. It happened that I got a call from a synergy circle we'll hear about of the evolutionary leaders called the Unit of Narrative Synergy Circle. And they were working on the Unit of Narrative, a really important document, which I think Jude will tell us a little bit about. And they asked me basically if I would do a children's story on the Unit of Narrative. So, you know, that was something to put that together. And so that's what happened. So I'd like Jude to come in and tell us a little bit about the Synergy Circle and the Unit of Narrative.
Thank you, Victoria. Well, first of all, I'm delighted that we are where we are with this amazing initiative. Thanks very much to you and to Ellen, who very much is primary for the beauty that you've put into this book. It goes back a few years, and Kurt's involved with this, and you too, when a number of change makers who'd been working with United Nations for many years came together, and they came together with a perspective that the Sustainable Development Goals that 193 countries had agreed to implement, along with a timeline called Agenda 2030, was vital for us to transform our relationships with each other and our planetary home. And they realized that the same thinking that created the problems would be unable to actually resolve the behaviors that arose from them. So these 150 or more change makers, including Victoria and your husband, Ron, came together. And in the early discussions we had, the sort of exploration was, what do we need? What do we need to sort of underpin and frame what we might bring to the possibilities for transformational change that might help to change the perspectives and therefore the behaviours that gave rise to the dysfunctionalities that require the Sustainable Development Goals. And it was very clear, and there was a huge consensus and coherence across these gatherings, that what we needed was a new narrative and a unitive narrative. That the SDGs and the way we behave in the world is basically based on a worldview of separation and materialism. And Indigenous teachings, wisdom teachings, universal wisdom teachings, ancient teachings have tried to tell us that isn't the way of the world. That isn't what the world really is. And yet, progressively over the last couple of centuries, that has been our worldview, that has been our paradigm, that has been our narrative. And so when we came together, there was this realization of a new and unitive narrative, which is both ancient, but new in the sense that now, for the first time, leading edge science across all scales of existence and many different fields of research are coming to the same view. They're upending, they're turning on its head this old story, this old paradigm of materialism and separation, and instead agreeing, converging with universal wisdom teachings and spirituality-based teachings to reveal a universe that meaningfully exists and purposefully evolves, a living and loving universe that is non-locally unified. And the science of that was rewarded with the 2022 Nobel Prize in Physics. So this is settled science now. So I was part of the drafting group that came up with a unitive narrative based on this convergence of leading edge science and universal wisdom teachings to offer a cosmological, a planetary, a social, a whole being narrative to underpin and frame potential transformational change in the world. And it began with how that could be applied to the SDGs and Agenda 2030, but it was realized that this is a generic narrative that applies to everything, because when we see through a lens of unity rather than a lens of separation, everything changes. And so, of course, being narrative sharing species, being storytellers from the very get-go of what it's meant to be human, and the stories we tell our children, and we share with them our view of the world, this unitive narrative offers us a new and yet ancient and whole way of educating and sharing this new unitive story with our children. And so the unitive narrative circle, synergy circle, whose basic remit is to share a unitive narrative to underpin and frame transformational change in the world. Who else could we call but Victoria? Who else could we call but the most wonderful storyteller we know to perhaps share this with young people, with children? And so One Brightness came from that.
So how do we tell that? How do we tell that to children? That story, that's what I was faced with. And there's no way to figure that out. And so this is a story for enlightened parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles to tell your children. This is this is a story for enlightened parents. So it starts with, this is the cover of the book. The centerpiece is right down the middle. That's the front page and the page in the back. And it's about one brightness, the eyes of love. And I'm going to take you through a little bit of it. I can't tell you the end, but I can just take you through some of it. So it starts with one brightness. And this started because Jude came out to help me, because I had a lot of questions when you can only imagine doing a children's book about the unitive narrative. So Kurt very kindly asked Jude to come in and support me in reading Gaia. That was an inspiration plus. So one brightness. So it starts out from nothingness. And again, enlightened parents, once before time and space. These are 3 to 8 year olds. It could go older. Younger ones love hearing it, seeing the pictures. Interesting to talk to your child about what nothingness, what's something that's no thing. Children know about things. So this is for enlightened parents. And then suddenly there was a sound that came out. And in just 3 minutes, now this is from Gaia, from Jude Caravan, in just 3 minutes, a gigantic light lit up our universe with one brightness. And this happened in 3 minutes of our time, as far as we know. So Jude, tell us, what is that about?
Well, first of all, we now know that our universe began 13.8 billion years ago, which is this beginning from no thingness into the birthing of a baby universe that has been existing and evolving ever since. But when our universe came into being all that time ago, we were taught at school, and it sort of fixed with us, that old paradigm, almost of an accidental universe. You know, we talk about a big bang. We know it wasn't big, but when we think of a bang, it's so chaotic. And yet we now know that it began in the most incredible, ordered, focused, fine-tuned way as the first moment of an ongoing big breath. And so in that sense, in the first 3 minutes after that very beginning of the big breath, that is our universe, that is continuing till this day, our universe was born into being. And incredibly hot. We talk about brightness, thinking visibility, but it was just extraordinarily hot and yet incredibly ordered. And its first moments in those 3 minutes, and then for some time beyond that, it actually sounded. It wasn't transparent to light, but it was to sound. Our universe was sung into being. Its very brightness of being was sung into being.
So out of this incredible happening, sparklings with eyes of love beamed out. And these sparklings, they became planets and stars and solar system. And for a long time, it was very hot. And then it began to cool down. By the way, Jude told me that hot in the universe is blue. So we took a little license here for children. So it began to cool down. This took a long time, a very long time. And on one little planet called Earth, on our planet Earth, a tiny spark came to Earth. And on planet Earth, sparklings appeared on Earth. And they appeared as birds and dinosaurs and fish and you and me. All these sparklings. And one thing we all knew is that we were one brightness. And we started creating. By the way, we started creating. We are the most creating. We were always creating. We were creating force. So we started creating Legos and computers. This is a Squishmallow right over here, this little black and white thing. It's a very popular children's item. So we started Legos and computers. We are so creative. And you know what? We got so creative that we turned our eyes away from the brightness and started getting really involved in what we were creating. And we got busier and busier. Here's a picture of a mother. She's a grown-up who's a little upset. As we started creating that way, a fog started to come in. A fog, a very unusual fog, not the usual fog, very unusual fog. And it started to come in. Now, we've had a lot of discussions, and you'll have to discuss with your children or think about it for yourself if they ask you, where did the fog come from? You have to be honest always. We don't really know. I mean, there have been a lot of people who gave some ideas about it, but I don't know if we really know why the fog came in, because after the fog came in, it got foggier and foggier, and everyone started to feel separate from one brightness. It felt separate. And then wanting more began, and everyone felt alone and scared. Jude, would you like to say something?
Yeah, well, first of all, Victoria, I think you've done this so amazingly and beautifully, because I think this really does share with children what has happened. And this isn't a blame game or a shame game of the journey we've been as a species at all. But as part of that journey, we almost went into more and more sense of individuality. But because of that, we've progressively sort of separated ourselves from community and from our planetary home, and from the realization, the remembering, the knowing that we are all sparklings, that we are all microcosms of our wondrous universe and its evolutionary impulse. And maybe that fog was a necessary part of our journey to this point. But it's been with its challenges, as you know, and its traumas, as you know. So I think what you've done here is so wonderful, because you've really dealt with that. You've appreciated that, and the book continues to move on from that. But it doesn't try and deny it, and it doesn't try and the creativity we have is wonderful. But a lot of our creativity, as you say, have focused us on the materiality, but it's also brought in more and more separation. And that is where the fog has really descended. We've forgotten who we really are, not just children. I mean, children probably remember better than adults, but by the time we've reached adulthood, often we have forgotten. So, as you say, for enlightened parents, remembering for ourselves and helping our children never forget that they are sparklings.
Yes, and of course, here's a section about how the plants look sad, the rocks were gloomy, even the air and water seemed dull. I think that's happening. And here also is an opportunity for parents to speak in some degree about pollution in some way. Again, I think what is really important, I know for me, with my background in terms of not a background as a writer or a teacher, but a background as being the fairy queen, is that you can't blame the children, and I don't think we should blame ourselves either. No, so you just can't put that kind of really heavy situation on children. So this is what started to happen. And I can't tell you the rest because, you'll have to go to Light on Light website where it's being published and is going, you can find it and then you can find out. But I can tell you it's very exciting. And at the very, very, very end, everyone loved happily ever after. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. And I love that the book brings us home to knowing that we are loved and therefore we can trust in love.
Truly. Thank you, Jude. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Victoria and Jude. And we can go over now to iconic author and famous systems scholar, Dr. Riane Eisler, and children's book author, Victoria Friedman, who you've just met, discussing their wonderful collaboration, Fogbusters, The Eyes of Care.
Well, thank you so much, Kurt, for this lovely introduction and for your introduction to Victoria, because you are really the matchmaker here. And I am so grateful to Victoria. I'm known for nonfiction books, not children's books, but children's books are so important. And we have to really help children use what they have, which is their intuitive knowledge of the world, that it can be good, that love is important. And Fogbusters is about that. It's based loosely on the four cornerstones of family and childhood, of gender, of economics, and of story and language. But it is for children, and as Jude and Victoria said, for adults too. It's a story of hope on this lovely, beautiful planet of ours. And the fog is what we're trying to lift, isn't it? All of us. This fog of separation, this fog of exploitation of our earth, of one another, the coding of care, caring connection is what really holds humans and the world together. Love, we yearn for it, and yet we have an economic system that does not value this work of care, which is coded feminine and hence devalued. And these four children in the story of Fogbusters, these children with the eyes of care, come into the world, well, to lift the fog, which is the fog that we must lift of the old thinking, as Jude said earlier in the program. And as Einstein said, we cannot solve problems with the same thinking, with the same consciousness that created them. So children they really deserve new stories. And Fogbusters is such a new story, and I love it. And I love the illustrations, as you will see.
Thank you, Riane. Thank you so much. That was a beautiful introduction. Yes, and so the way this story came about is that Kurt, I guess we call him Kurt, Catalyst King Kurt, the great catalyst. Kurt invited me to meet Riane, who was looking to do a children's story about her work. Again, a awesome goal. And so we got together, and before I even met her, I was reading about the Four Cornerstones, looking up at her unbelievable amount of work, and I immediately thought of four children. Four children just came to me, four corners of the earth, just like that. These things just unfold. So we started working on these meeting together with Kurt, and there were a few other people, and it was really a wonderful, it was like a party every week. And so we began to work together on this story, and it was quite a team effort. People would just say things, and I would write them down and just wait, and then they would just appear. They would come into the story right to the end. They just would appear in the story as they were coming in. And then I just want to mention something about the color in this, because I have a very dear friend, Ellen Mann, who has done many books, and I've done children's books with her. And we get together, I take my doodles that are scanned in, they're just black and white. You can see them at the end. They're in the form of a coloring book for children. But she scans them in, and then we sit together. My God, do you believe this? On Zoom, and we create the universe. We color the universe. She clicks on it. We say, let's make Olivia skin purple, lavender. And by the way, Olivia is a tree spirit. Tree spirits can change their color at will. They can just change the color of their eyes, the color of their hair. When I talk to them about race, about the race situation on Earth, they can't understand it. They just think we're very boring, that we're just, a million shades of beige. That's what they call us. They think we are very boring, the spirit, the fairy world. So also, we're doing these books with Rian. So I look up what is the most famous children's story of all time. Like, what is it? And guess what? It's Cinderella. So, I thought, okay, I'm going to have to ask Rian about Cinderella. So let's hear from Rian Eisler about Cinderella.
Well, if you know my work, you know that I've proposed that we really leave these fragmenting categories of right, left, religious, secular, Eastern, Western, Northern, Southern, which we have inherited from times that were more violent, that were more top down, that were even more exploitive than now, and that we really think of patterns. That's something that I really want children to start seeing. And one of these patterns is the configuration of the domination system. And the other one, and it can be Eastern, Western, Northern, Southern, religious, secular, anything. And the other is what I've called a partnership system. And what we see, of course, in Cinderella is a perfect story to indoctrinate girls and boys into how gender is viewed. Because there are two forms in our species, right? The female form and the male form. Of course, today we know there are others in between. But that's only because there has been movement towards the partnership side, where diversity is valued rather than ranked as superior or inferior, to dominate or to be dominated, and to be served and to serve, which is how the old gender stereotypes are, aren't they? Which are nonsense, because men can be caring and women are sometimes not caring. But get back to Cinderella. Here we have the story that, number one, it idealizes the top, royalty, the prince, right? It also idealizes men. It's the prince who saves, who rescues Cinderella. Talk about learned helplessness, taught helplessness. Talk about really indoctrinating both girls and boys into this passivity is feminine, right? And activity, rescue, there is no agency for girls. They're completely dependent on the prince, and yes, they have to fit into his slipper. Think about that. What does it teach us about what a girl, a woman's role in life is? I mean, it's, as I said, it's a perfect story for domination, idealizing royalty, and the relationship between women, oh my God, it's a mess. First of all, you cannot trust an older woman. Have you noticed that in these classic fairy tales, she's a witch, she's the evil stepmother, like in Cinderella or in Snow White, right? I mean, but the wisdom is always the male wisdom. I mean, it's a really classical domination fairy tale. And we have to really offer alternatives, because my work is not just about deconstruction, it's about reconstruction. And children deserve stories about caring, about the value of the so-called women's work, of caring for people, keeping a clean and healthy home environment, right? I mean, which translates into our planetary environment. So this story starts with, out in the universe, there's a teeny tiny planet called Earth. It was a place of one brightness. And on this shining planet lived a tree spirit named Olivia. And she was the caretaker, care. She gives care, she takes care of us, of the Earth. And she really cared what happens on our planet. But, and if you want to show the next slide, Victoria, and maybe you want to take over the narration, because it's about this strange fog that crept all over the Earth and washed out all the colors and turned the Earth gray. And of course, the fog is really the domination system, isn't it? That we have to really get through to who we really are, who we really can be, which is caring human beings, both women, men, and everyone in between. And that's what this story is about.
Thank you.
Victoria, I leave it to you to tell more of this wonderful story and your wonderful illustrations and Ellen's work too.
Thank you. Yes, so this fog, again, it's the same story, because it happens in many different, infinite ways on our planet. So what began to happen, again, this is for enlightened parents. These stories are for enlightened parents, and they are for parents who want to have conversations with their children, which will continue. I have books that I remember that my parents read to me when I was very, very young. So there's Olivia. She's a tree spirit, and she's a little sad because these are loosely the four cornerstones. With bad things began to happen, the idea that mothers and children are not valued. I learned so much from this. Of course, I knew that, but I did not know the extent. I did not know his story about this. And of course, the toughest and the richest and fighting. And so Olivia, this tree spirit, she asked Mother Earth for help. And there's Mother Earth. She has a lot of rigs on her. I think she's very happy, very, very colorful, Mother Earth. And there's Mother Earth, and Mother Earth, she went out to the universe. Mother Earth prayed to the universe, and no prayer goes unanswered from the universe. So immediately 4 children with sparkling eyes were born in the 4 corners of the earth. So here we meet Kathy's from California. See the cable car and the bridge? Oro is from Iceland, the land of ice. Rico is from Brazil, Carnival land, and he's a musician, loves music. And Emu, she is from the east. She's from Thailand and Cambodia. And she does a lot of planting with beautiful flowers. So that's what happened. And then these children were growing up. And when they were 7 years old, Olivia whispered into their parents' ear. She said, take a trip to Thailand. Go see the temples. Take the children to see the temples in Thailand. So they went. It was a very, very long trip. And when they got there, they were soon on a bus to the tree temples. Those are their parents standing outside, getting to know each other. And here's the temple, and they entered that temple. And if you notice that temple is actually a sort of doodle based on Angkor Wat and Ta Prohm in Cambodia, places that I visited. And they are so magical and extraordinary. And there's the 4 little children going into the temple. And here we are inside the temple. Now, inside the temple, see how the roots have gone through this, all broken up to the sky, and the roots come down and they go right to the floor of the temple. And there's all sorts of carvings all over this temple. But they're the 4 children. They're a little scared because on the middle of the temple floor were 4 cornerstones, 4 stones of beautiful color, and they were very scared. And they walked into the temple. They walked into the temple. And when they walked there, that's when they saw coming out of the tree temple, Olivia, the tree spirit. And she told them who they were. She told them of their destiny, that they have the eyes of care, and that they will clear the fog. And they had to choose a stone. They each chose a stone, and the stone immediately went on their fingers and turned into sparkling care rings. So now these children have care rings, and they know who they are, and they're ready to go home. Oh, sorry, before they go home, they go out and their eyes of care open, and the entire countryside around the land of temples began to be colorful. It all changed into brilliant color. Look how happy the parents are. They're hugging their children. But when they got back, Rian, they got back, and things weren't so simple. See, they're still at the airport here. They're still at the airport. And they got back, and people wanted to keep the fog. Rian, you just want to say a few words?
Well, I think what we're really talking about in this story is the reality that people who have been brought up to be fearful, to deflect their pain and their lack of care against outgroups, they want the fog because they're comfortable and they're afraid. But there are enough of us who want something better, who really want to stand, if you will, reality right side up, because the fog really stood reality on its head. And that is exactly what happens in this story. I don't want to give away the ending, but it's really up to us, and it's very much up to this generation of children to have a new worldview, to see that there is a choice that we can make. And yes, these children can and did really make all the difference. It's an empowering story. It's empowering for children. It's empowering for parents and for grandparents and for anybody. And I'm so grateful, and I want to really end on this note, to Victoria and also to Kurt and to Ellen, because I so want to reach children with this work, and to have them know that we can, with the eyes of care, through care, do nothing less than to change the world and stand reality right side up and value care, in starting with valuing those who give care, but really valuing ourselves and valuing this wonderful, gorgeous planet of ours.
And they lived connectedly ever after.
I love that.
Yes, a happy ending. And let's that be what we all wish for and share for this International Children's Month and for all time. And as you'll see on the banners that follow, you can find One Brightness and Fogbusters at all of your online booksellers. You can also check them out further at lightonlight.us and Brightness Books at Vistar, that's VISTAR, foundation.org. Thanks for joining us for this special broadcast for the International Children's Month, and keep on seeing the world through your eyes of love and your eyes of care. Thanks for joining us.